The BTK Killer case. A pattern that hid in plain sight. In the mid-1970s, a series of crimes began to unsettle the city of Wichita, Kansas. They did not happen all at once. They were separated by time, and at first they appeared disconnected. Families were attacked inside their homes. There were no signs of forced entry in many cases. The crimes occurred quietly, often at night. Over time, investigators would come to understand that these acts were committed by a single individual. He would later become known as the BTK Killer. The name came from the words he used to describe his actions: bind, torture, kill. The person responsible was Dennis Rader. For decades, he remained unidentified. Dennis Rader was born in 1945 and raised in Kansas. To neighbors and co-workers, he appeared ordinary. He held steady employment. He was involved in his church. He lived a quiet suburban life. Nothing about his public image suggested criminal activity. The first known attacks attributed to BTK occurred in 1974. A family was found killed inside their home. There were no witnesses. There was little physical evidence. Police struggled to understand how the crime had been committed without alerting neighbors. Then, months later, another incident occurred. And then another. As patterns emerged, investigators realized they were dealing with a serial offender. The crimes shared similarities. The suspect appeared to plan in advance. He targeted residential homes. He waited for opportunities. The offender showed knowledge of the neighborhoods. In some cases, he entered homes without drawing attention. In others, he communicated with victims before the attack. Despite these similarities, identifying the suspect proved difficult. There were no reliable eyewitnesses. Forensic technology at the time was limited. The crimes left communities fearful. Residents changed routines. People locked doors more carefully. Trust eroded quietly. Then something unexpected happened. The killer began communicating with the media and police. Letters arrived. In them, the writer described the crimes. He demanded attention. He referred to himself using the initials BTK. These communications confirmed what investigators already suspected. The crimes were connected. The person responsible wanted to be known, but he did not want to be caught. After a period of activity, the crimes stopped. Years passed without new attacks. The case went cold. The name BTK remained, but the person behind it disappeared into anonymity. For nearly 3 decades, there were no confirmed communications. No new crimes linked definitively to the same offender. Investigators kept the case open. Files were reviewed periodically, but without new evidence, progress was limited. Meanwhile, Dennis Rader continued his life. He married, he raised children, he remained active in his community. No arrest was made. The BTK Killer became a case discussed in law enforcement circles as an example of how offenders can blend into everyday life. Then, in the early 2000s, something changed. After years of silence, new communications began to arrive. Letters referencing old crimes were sent to the media. The tone was familiar. The style matched earlier messages. the BTK Killer had returned.
What followed would transform a decades-old cold case into a modern investigation. As the new letters arrived, investigators recognized patterns they had not seen in decades. The language matched earlier communications. The references aligned with details that had never been released publicly. The writer demonstrated knowledge that only the offender would possess. Law enforcement treated the renewed contact seriously. This time, however, the tools available were different. Advances in forensic science, data analysis, and digital tracking allowed investigators to examine details that would have been impossible to analyze years earlier. The letters were carefully studied. Envelopes were examined. Postmarks were recorded. The timing and locations of mailings were mapped. The writer appeared confident. In his messages, he sought recognition and control. He referenced past crimes and taunted authorities. But he also made mistakes. In one communication, the writer asked a question. He wanted to know whether a floppy disk could be traced. Police responded publicly, stating that it could not. The writer trusted the response. He sent a disk. When investigators examined it, they found metadata that had not been erased. The data led them to a computer used at a local church. From there, attention narrowed to an individual who fit the profile investigators had developed years earlier. Dennis Rader. Rader was questioned. During the interview, investigators presented evidence methodically. They referenced the communications. They referenced the disk. They referenced details only the offender would know. Rader eventually admitted responsibility. He provided detailed accounts of the crimes. His statements aligned with evidence collected decades earlier. In 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. The arrest shocked the community. People who had known him struggled to reconcile the image of a quiet neighbor with the admissions made in court. The legal proceedings moved forward. Rader chose to plead guilty. During hearings, he described his actions in a factual, detached manner. There was no attempt to dispute responsibility. The court reviewed each case individually. Victim impact statements were presented. Families spoke about years of loss, fear, and unanswered questions. The court sentenced Dennis Rader to multiple life sentences. He would never be eligible for parole. For Wichita and surrounding communities, the arrest marked the end of a long period of uncertainty. A case that had defined fear for an entire generation was finally resolved. But the resolution did not erase the impact. The crimes had altered lives. They had changed how people viewed safety in their own homes. They had demonstrated how an offender could hide behind normal routines for decades. The case also highlighted how investigative persistence and technological progress can intersect. Evidence preserved for years became decisive when paired with new methods. What once seemed unsolvable was resolved through careful, incremental work. After the sentencing, the BTK case moved from investigation into record. The crimes were no longer unresolved. The identity was known. The timeline was complete. For many families, the conclusion came decades after the loss itself. Some had waited most of their lives to hear accountability spoken aloud in court. Others had lived with uncertainty for so long that resolution felt unfamiliar. The guilty plea removed the need for prolonged trials. It also removed ambiguity. Dennis Rader would spend the rest of his life in prison. The case became a reference point for law enforcement. It demonstrated how offenders can maintain ordinary public lives while committing serious crimes in private. It also showed how long gaps in criminal activity can cause investigations to stall, even when patterns exist. Most importantly, it illustrated how mistakes made years later can undo decades of concealment. The single decision to communicate again reopened the case. Technology that did not exist when the crimes were committed became decisive. A simple piece of digital data connected a long, cold case to a real person. From that point, the investigation moved quickly. What had taken decades to uncover was resolved in months. The BTK case also changed how future investigations were approached. Preservation of evidence became a priority. Cold cases were reevaluated with new methods. Communication strategies with offenders were reconsidered. The case reminded investigators that time does not always protect those who believe they have escaped notice. For the public, the story left a lasting impression. Not because of how the crimes were described, but because of how long the truth remained hidden. A person trusted in everyday settings had carried out actions that contradicted his public identity. That contradiction is what many people remember. Late at night, when stories like this are played quietly, the focus often shifts away from the specifics and toward the passage of time. How long fear can last without answers. How slowly some truths surface. How resolution, when it comes, is often quieter than expected. The BTK case did not end with a dramatic confrontation. It ended with records, testimony, and a sentence read aloud in court. For victims and families, that was not closure, but it was finality. The case now exists as a documented history, a reminder of persistence, a reminder of patience, and a reminder that some stories take decades to finish. If you've listened through this case, you've followed a pattern that hid in plain sight for years. If the detail stayed with you, or if something about the timeline stood out, you're welcome to reflect on it. Quiet consideration is often how long cases finally settle. If this calm, late-night approach to documented crime is something you return to, more cases will follow. There is no urgency, no emphasis on shock, just another case, carefully traced from uncertainty to accountability as the night continues. Thank you for listening.